Well, that's a few things. It's the only surviving example of a pre-dreadnought battleship. It is the only surviving example of a Japanese battleship. It is the only surviving example of a British-built battleship. Here we are on the rear deck with the rear main turret. This is a replica. The entire ship is a bit of a Theseus ship in some regards. So this is a 12-inch gun. The Japanese Navy metrified in 1917, so before this, a lot of their ships were built in England, such as this one, and they used English measurements. So this is a 12-inch gun. It has a range of approximately 10 kilometers, but a practical fighting range closer to 6 kilometers. And even then, 10% hit ratio was considered really good. They trained hard to get that, and they trained hard to beat that. Here's an example of some shells. So we have first an armored piercing, and then a common shell, drawn steel. So these are your 30 centimeters or 12 inches. The turret itself would have needed a crew of 40 people. It weighed about 50 tons. Oh, those projectiles, they weigh about 400 kilos. And then if you look up top, there's the battery commander and gunner's observation window. So Prince Hiroshima actually would have been in there during the Battle of the Yellow Sea, if I remember correctly. So as a pre-dreadnought, it is not all heavy armament. Over here, we have one of the 6-inch guns. So there are 4 6-inch guns on this level, and the rest of the 6-inch guns are on this level here below us. Here is the wireless telegraph room, so they would have to communicate with Morse code, and this was actually how the ships received intelligence and communicated with each other, which was actually a key part of the ability to find the Russian fleet and engage it. In here we have a gun room for a 6-inch gun. So the ship had 14 of these 6-inch guns, 5 on each side in the deck below us, and then 2 on each side in this deck higher up. So there's the gunnery captain, Hamer. He's responsible for the breech block. So to load it, you open up this breech and it swings out. First they put in a shell. Now this is what's called a separate quick firing system. So first goes in the shell and then goes in that piece there. So that's the quick firing part. All of the charge is contained in this one container, that making it quicker than using a bag or loose powder or other systems at the time. So at the time, quick firing was very, very popular in British-built ships, even the 6-inch guns. Later, they would change that and they would not go with quick firing for 6-inch guns, but at the time, this was in vogue. So he opens the breech, whoop, this shell goes in, thump, then one of these goes in, thump, close the breech. This guy is responsible for aiming. He was in charge of fire control when to fire. So this is my new duck hunting gun. I think I'll finally be able to hit one out of the sky. Now we come to the 3-inch guns. So these were firing a 5.4 kilo round. These were also quick firing, and this was used for anti-torpedo boat service. So these were small boats that were armed with torpedoes and would attack capital ships. Very popular at the time, and it was an attempt to use a cheap ship to destroy an expensive ship. So these 3-inch guns were to protect against torpedo boats and other small boats, and I mean, you could use it on a capital ship if you got very, very, very uncomfortably close. Here we are at the bow, so you can see right in front of me, the bow 12-inch main cannon. Once again, you can see the commanders and gunners observation right there and there and there. You can see off on the side, you can see one of the 6 inches. Above, you can see the 3 inches, and you can see the bridge and mast. Up there is the Z flag. What massive system of chains are needed for the anchor. Like I said, it being a bit of a Theseus ship, they actually don't have this anchor. So if you're looking at it from the ocean, you might notice it's missing. Most people are going to look at it from the park. A lot of these pieces are replicas, rebuilds, or taken off of other ships. So during battle, being on deck is actually quite dangerous. That's why around the 3-inch guns there's shields. And they also have these, I don't know, I guess I'd call them pillbox-like locations. So you still have pretty good observation. You can see out over, there's a 12-inch right in front of us. You can see off to the sides pretty far. You have good observation from inside here, but you're still protected. There's only this narrow thing, nice thick metal, and the way the doorway is designed is actually very interesting. Is this very narrow section here is actually used to decrease the likelihood of shrapnel coming in and hitting you. So first off, round. So rounded areas generally, because it's harder to strike them face on because they're round, it's actually more difficult to penetrate generally rounded pieces of metal. And then when you come in here, it actually is supposed to stop shrapnel from bouncing in to getting you. Now, still could happen, still did happen, but it made it less likely that you were going to basically eat a piece of shrapnel while you were inside there. Now, let's go up here. One of the issues for ships during this time period was that we didn't have radar, we didn't have night vision, we had a lot fewer ways to see something. So in the night, these huge spotlights were key to being able to pick up ships, particularly ships trying to sneak up on you, like those torpedo boats I mentioned earlier, that the 3-inch guns, you see 4 of them right there, were to protect against. Actually, as far as torpedo boat defense, this side is a little lacking. I don't know if there might used to have been more 3 inches on the side here. I'll have to check the Janes. So as you can see, they would have to use the wheels to adjust the elevation. This could give you an idea of sighting. You'd look through here. Let me see if I can get that to line up. You look through here for sighting. And here's the beach block. As far as turning, just physical, manual turning. Not that bad. Now there is a stopper. Oh, you can actually turn the thing quite far. You might be in danger of hitting yourself there. There is a down here that acts as the stopper, giving it a maximum traverse. There's the breach. Probably ammo was stored nearby through here or over here. These were quick firing, of course. I think they were one-piece quick firing, just meaning that the bullet, the casing, the powder is all together into one. So you can ram it in, close the breech, and fire. But you could control the ship from right here. You could steer, you could send the telegraph about the engine, and give orders. So there are one of these for the engines, it's engine telegraph. So you give an order here, and then the order shows up in the engine room. There is a compass right there. Here we have our more standard wheelhouse here. Speakers, same thing, engine telegraph, compass, wheel. The one below is more for combat. I imagine that either when this one was knocked out or when combat started, they moved operations down to the armored one down below, or more armored. All right, let's go on this side. Oh, once again, spotlight, searchlight. Here is our chart room. So these tables were used for placing out charts, mapping where they were going to go, where they are, and then those are the pennants, the signal flags. So combinations mean different things, or individual flag can mean something. Just like, oh, we can't see it, Z flag. We're now on the top forecastle, which is where Admiral Togo would have stood when this was his flagship, right down here. So these voice tubes would communicate with the steering house down there. And then over here is the rangefinder, which no longer works. But this was used to find the range of the target ship, and then that would be communicated to the guns so they knew how far they had to fire to hit the target. Also gives you an amazing view. Now, it's kind of not the safest place to be. You have an amazing view. Fortunately, other parts of the ship are being targeted, but it still could be a dangerous location, and that's why you had examples of lots of flag officers during this time period getting injured. Alright, I've shown you all the top. It's time to go down below. Oh, here's a quick explanation about the Z flag. So, the flag hoisted atop the mast was Z flag, the last leg, the L bend. At the time of the Battle of the Sea of Japan, Saka hoisted the flag to her mast to transmit Commander-in-Chief Admiral Togo's message to the combined fleet. The rise and the fall of the Empire depends on this battle. Let every man do his utmost. So, as I kind of expected, the bridges are set up more in parity to each other, and there'd be a lot more boats. Then the current markup applies, and I kind of suspected that there probably would have been 3-inch guns there, which this is showing. I feel like they're just missing. Once again, I think I'll just check the James record on the ship again. Under deck is pretty much a museum. It has a lot of artifacts, particularly dealing with Admiral Togo and the influence of Japanese victory in the Russo-Japanese War. And it also has a pretty good section on the major players involved in the Russo-Japanese War. That makes sense. So it looks like they put bags to absorb shrapnel and anything hitting along the surfaces, so it was less likely for something to hit and bounce. Also would protect that position up on deck a lot better. That's a rangefinder, actually. There's Admiral Togo. This is interesting. So this shows locations where the Mikasa was hit. As you can see, it kind of hit a surprising amount in the rigging. So you got a hit to the front turret, to the funnels. Yeah. Mostly small hits. Oh, that lifeboat really got it. Now on the other side, here is a wood block print that's then colored in, showing a destroyer in action. So a destroyer, a torpedo boat destroyer, but at this point called a destroyer, were much smaller and armed with light guns and torpedoes. That was their hope of taking out a capital ship with torpedoes. Here are some pictures of what life was like on board. Back then, ships needed larger crews. You needed more people to run a ship, also just run the weapons. You think about how much stuff is automated now that wasn't back then. So it honestly kind of makes modern warships look roomy by comparison. Part of perhaps the irony of the ship, you can see where it was built, is that it fought all this time in the Russo-Japanese War, completely survived, and then there was an accident with the magazine and it sunk and had to be refloated, and at that time was actually rearmed with more modern gunnery than was used in the Russo-Japanese War. They've been removed, but this diagram actually shows the torpedo tubes located on the battleship. So we usually think of torpedoes coming from submarines or destroyers, but battleships at the time often also had torpedo tubes. And then we can see a cutaway of the turret. It's technically a bar, but not a turret. Here we are in the officers area. So this is the staff officers room. So this was like a social place for them. If we continue along, we have the chief of staff saloon. So there was actually, because this is a pretty big ship, there was actually space for the officers to have, particularly the high-ranking officers, there's a lot of officers on these ships, to have quite a bit more space. So here's the engineer of the fleet's cabin. You have to remember this was a flagship, so they had the very high-ranking officers. The Admiral had his own bathroom, which was right here. And the Admiral had his sleeping cabin, which is, you know, quite nice. Wash basin, desk, bookshelf, bed. Then, if we come through here, we have the Admiral's Saloon, which is actually an armed saloon. So the Admiral's Saloon was a place for meetings and official lunches and where VIPs were entertained. This is also the room where Rear Admiral Nebogov, who was was left as the commander of the Russian fleet after the Battle of the Sea of Japan, surrendered in this very room. Interesting fact, this table is mahogany. It was built in England specifically for the ship and had to be taken in as pieces, and shows pretty typical Victorian style aesthetics. After the Admiral's Saloon, we have the Admiral's cabin. This was basically his office where he got his work done. There is the Admiral himself, Togo, and like all ships of this period, it had a portrait of the Emperor. Well, this is actually a photograph of a portrait. It's not individually painted, and these were put on Imperial Japanese Navy warships. And so, if they could, when the ship was going down, they actually rescued the portrait. In fact, a few times that was sort of the official, the ship's going down, we've removed the portrait. Stepping out from there, we actually have a deck. Here is the 3-inch gun, which is in the Admiral's Saloon. So the Admiral has a deck out here. Here we have the Captain's Saloon, much smaller than the Admiral's. This would have been where he got his office work done. He would have held meetings himself here. This is the pantry. I've talked about this on a few different ships, and this is actually one of the better examples that you can see. So, because the ships would rock back and forth or move quite violently if they got hit, the plates and bowls were put in these special racks. Now you see what would happen is you'd put them in here, you'd slide them down if you want to take them out, you slide them up. So that way they can't move that much and they're much less likely to break. Now, these obviously are not the original because they're not sized correctly, but it gives you an idea. Same with the cups. They would fit inside the rack, so they were less likely to move and break during stormy seas or combat. Just like the Admiral, the Captain had his own bathroom. This room would have been the Chief of Staff's sleeping cabin. It is now display. We have instruments, belts, crumptons. Naturally, big bands were, well, look, it was hard to record music, so if you wanted entertainment, this was one of your options, was live music. And so a lot of these ships would have live music because you're at sea for a long time, there's lots of downtime, people get bored, so they would have events. There's a picture of their band. In one of the pictures, you saw them watching sumo wrestling, different things to keep them occupied. This room is the wardroom, so this is the room where the officers would eat. Actually pretty nice, way nicer than being enlisted. So here's an explanation of how the turrets, well, technically the barbette works. So the ammo was stored down below because you actually didn't want it too close to where the shells would actually be hitting. So they would actually be brought up by an elevator from down below, and then they would use hydraulics to push them up, elevate them up, hydraulics into the gun. Now you have the shell in there. Now you need the powder. So the powder was stored in another section. think this one over here, and was brought up by its own system so that you didn't have too much powder or too much shells close to where you could get hit. Take a view down here, we can see that those are the powder bags, the powder charges that would be loaded into the ship, into the elevator here, and the shells are down there. Now, if you had an accident down here, it was very, very bad, and this actually happened. After the Russo-Japanese War, there was an accident down here with the powder, and it ended up blowing a hole and sinking the ship. Now, fortunately, the ship was in port, so it wasn't in deep water, so they were able to refloat it and fix it, and they actually updated the armament during that time. I hope you enjoyed this tour of the Mikasa, the only surviving Imperial Japanese Navy warship, the only surviving pre-dreadnought battleship, the only surviving battleship built in the United Kingdom. Why don't you go down to the comment section, tell me what was your favorite part of the tour. Thank you for liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing, and I will see you in my next adventure.
Jamaica!